Privilege of being here with Hadar Shemesh, who is owner of Accents Way and hadarshemesh.com. I'm sorry if I messed up.
So good. Really good.
It's
I'm
still
very
good. Okay.
impressed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Like, you Americanized it a bit, but it's okay because I do that too. So
And she's here to talk about well, her specialty is pronunciation and accent training, and she's going to help us a bit kind of combine that knowledge with studying for English tests like TOEFL or IELTS, or another test is Duolingo English test is becoming more popular. And so I'm really excited to have you here. So Hadar, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So why don't we just I'm very familiar with your work. You're very popular on YouTube and social media, but maybe you want to just give a quick introduction of yourself, your background, and what you do.
Sure. So I'm a speech, pronunciation, and fluency coach. I help people who are non-native speakers of English or new speakers of English speak English with confidence and sounding clear and feeling authentic when speaking. So bringing the language closer to you. And I help people from around the world. I'm a non-native speaker of English myself. So a lot of the things that I teach are things that I have learned myself and integrated into my own personal journey with English. And I think that pronunciation is key when it comes to spoken English, but it really, like, it all goes together, right? Like pronunciation, fluency, and the knowledge of the language and the actual practice. So we really try to find the most efficient and effective way to speak English without hesitations or without second guessing yourself. And that's it. That's ultimately what I do and what we do in the company.
Something we talk about with our students is automaticity. Like it
Yeah,
feels
exactly.
that it feels like something automatic that just kind of comes out without you thinking about it. And I guess that's the kind of goal, right? Is like, so you first learn about it, you practice intentionally with it, and hopefully over time.
I would also add a step that is like even repeating phrases in my experience, it has helped significantly. It has helped my students significantly. Just repeating grammar forms, right? Or maybe specific tenses or specific prepositions, definitely with sound. So repeating it in context that you don't have to come up with. And the reason why I think it's helpful is because this is how I learned grammar. This is how it helped me, because as I used to be an actor, and I studied acting in New York, and I had to memorize a lot of text, right?
Right.
Every day I used to memorize something. And I remember that those forms got stuck in my brain because I was repeating them.
Right.
I was like saying them again and again and again and again. And then all of a sudden I was like, okay, this is the form. And then I would use it, just like adding different words, but I already had the structure in my brain. So it was really, really helpful. And then I was doing it intentionally. And then and then it became a part of my speech, right? I wasn't thinking about it anymore.
Right. That's interesting that you mentioned acting, because, before I found your work, actually, I would work with the advanced English language learners, and, they were trying to, fix some, or just, try to work on some habits and some things that they wanted to improve. And a lot of helpful advice I found was from dialect coaches, and acting coaches, and that the work in ELT, there wasn't a ton of really advanced kind of pronunciation work kind of stuff. And I found that dialect coaches had some of the most helpful exercises, information about kind of how to improve your speaking performance. It's interesting that you mentioned that. And then one thing that I also mention to students is, one nice thing about being an actor is that you have a script that's contained. It's you have a certain number of lines, and these are the lines. The English language is so big, it can feel kind of endless, and that you're always have to work on something. So having, like, let's say 10 lines from a movie that you're trying to do really well at might be a better exercise.
Absolutely. I use
Mm,
that all the time. So I use a
yeah.
lot of elements from my theater studies in my
Mm,
programs because
nice.
I find it, they love it and it's so incredibly useful. So memorizing texts, for example, and
Mm, mm,
analyzing the sounds, intonation patterns, stress patterns, all of that. And then using it as if it's your own is
right.
really empowering. It really feels like, okay, I'm using it. I don't have to think about the words. I'm able to concentrate on many other things, like my
Mm,
emotions, making sure that my voice is projected. So
mm,
all of a sudden you start noticing all these elements that are important also in a test, in a speaking test, right? Like,
right.
your energy, how you speak up if people hear you is key. So
Right.
it's not just about finding the words, not just about using them properly. It's also about, the what you project. And usually like when you project confidence, you become more confident
Right.
and you kind of like you're able to breathe into that. And then when you're because stress really affects fluency. It
Right. Right.
really affects how available the words are.
Mm,
So mindset is a huge element when it comes to doing the work that we do.
right.
And just back to what you said, yes, like voice work, speech work, identifying objectives, tone of voice, right? Like it really helps people to use English in a
Mm.
better and more fun way,
Mm.
but funner way. Uh,
I don't even know. More fun. Yeah, whatever
More
it is.
fun. It's like
Yeah,
funner.
whatever.
It's just like a funny word.
Yeah,
But and it gives you this freedom and you want to make the
right.
language your own in a way. So that really allows you to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue to one aspect of English tests, which is stress. And it's a
Yeah.
performance, and for the TOEFL, it's a contained performance. You have 45 seconds to speak. In IELTS, you have an interview, and so it's like ready, speak, and then you have to speak for
Yeah.
exactly 45, 60. And IELTS is more conversational, but yeah, it's very artificial in a way,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and so is there any advice that you have for ways to relax people who feel stressed before a test or during a test?
Absolutely. So, first of all, to come very prepared, I'm sure that most students come prepared, but come prepared with the experience of having to come up with, a quick answer to questions. And so just the experience of doing that again and again and again
Mm,
um, is it's like to anticipate the experience and the situation. So there is nothing new. It's not new. It's not a new experience that you have to manage and handle.
right.
Managing your breath is key. So a lot of
Okay.
times, especially when we speak a second language on a test or not on a test, um, is like we tend to reduce the breath and then like take very shallow breaths, and then you don't get a lot of oxygen into your body. You don't and when you breathe into your belly, when you
Mm,
breathe deeply, when you have enough oxygen too, it really calms you down. It affects the vagus nerve that is
mm,
responsible for your stress levels and also your voice.
okay.
So ultimately breath is key, and taking a few deep breaths, even if it's just like you have 45 seconds, take a deep breath and start speaking. If you start speaking without a lot of breath, you're going to run out of breath. You're going to hyperventilate, maybe take too many short breaths, and then it's
Okay.
going to affect your nervous system.
Mm,
Um, I think working on your goals and giving yourself permission, like not being too stressed about mistakes,
mm,
is
mm,
key. So like you have to identify your relationship to mistakes in your in
mm,
and your level of perfectionism.
right.
Because when you're trying to get it right, and then the
Mm,
first moment you start speaking, you make a mistake, and then you're like, that's it. Like
mm, mm,
your brain shuts down, then it's not productive, right? It's not
mm,
productive. It's not going to help you. A mistake is not going to ruin your abilities to succeed. It's just like they want to see your performance first and foremost. And again, like stress can really deteriorate your level of English.
mm,
Even if your English is much better, it's not going to come across because fluency is subjective. Fluency is not, you don't have like this level of fluency and that's it. In every
right.
single situation, you would perform the same way.
Right.
So recognizing, like really embracing mistakes and knowing that if you make a mistake and you recognize it, you can either repeat yourself, or just don't get sucked into that rabbit hole of that's it, I ruined my chances right now. Just move on. The ability to bounce back
Mm,
from a moment that you perceive as a failure is the secret. To bounce back
okay.
and not overthink it, not
Mm,
obsess
mm,
over, like, if you don't feel that, if obsession is not part of your day-to-day patterns of the brain, like, you can just simply move on and not think about it. And
mm,
really, like, don't try to get it perfect, because it's not going to work. No one's
mm,
looking for perfect, because perfection doesn't really exist when it comes to speaking a language. And again,
mm,
like, I think it's a big inhibitor.
mm,
And I think feeling like you deserve to speak, coming in, like, knowing that what you have to say is important,
mm,
and that you are enough and your English is enough, and really, like, maybe having this mantra that you say to yourself, I know how to do this. This is possible for me.
mm,
People are interested in what I have to say. My
mm.
success is inevitable. I really do think that it puts you in a better state than having negative thought
Sure.
patterns, because that really doesn't take you to a place where you will thrive.
Right, right. So
Yeah.
yeah, the kind of, I guess that has to do a bit with mindset, like how you are thinking about yourself, and how
Yeah.
and so if you have this, there was a one thing that we teach students is like your inner coach. There's probably a
Yeah.
lot of other terms for it, but
I like that.
you're
Yeah.
yeah, your inner coach, the person who's talking to you while you're talking. And so,
Yeah.
is it this negative or positive influence? And most of the time it's negative. I mean, I just think for almost
Yeah.
all of us, it's the negative.
Yeah. I would say
And
the inner critic, and the coach would be that
right.
little voice that says, "You can do it. You can do it."
Right, right. The coach is the cheerleader, and the critic is is
Yeah.
is is the other 90% usually. And so, yeah,
And
it's
also recognizing that
yeah,
everyone's going through that, right? Like,
right,
you and
right,
I, we have that negative voice. It's just
yeah,
like, the question is, how much focus are you allowing it to take, or how much do you take it seriously or not?
right, right,
Are
right,
you listening to it, or
yeah.
are you like, "Pff, shut up,
Right, right, right. Yeah. So yeah,
sit
I
in the
think
back."
that's one thing that I mentioned sometimes, is that yeah, it never goes away. Your stress and that kind of stuff. It never disappears. But the way that you think about it, like you said, and the way that you manage it is in your control, and the way that somewhat is in your control. And I think
Absolutely.
that what you said is great. Like just feel like you deserve to be here, and focus on your preparation as well. So let me also ask about the practice. So the way that students practice, every day. Of course,
Mm.
when we're preparing for tests, a lot of students feel like they need to just do a lot of practice, a lot of
Mhm.
test practice, and that kind of thing. Is there any type of activity that you find is helpful for students to practice at home, especially speaking, where it's hard to do alone? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Definitely. So
mm,
I think that when it comes to speaking alone, um, you don't need to do a lot of it. But as I said at
mm,
the beginning, like, try to make it's more about quality than quantity. Well,
mm,
speaking is like, the more the better, right? But if you don't have a lot of time and you need to cover all those different aspects of the test,
right,
and you need to do a lot of work, then,
mm,
you know, let's try to be realistic and see what can you do that you can be consistent with and
mm,
do every single day, because that's more important than, spending 5 hours a day once a week on speaking, and then,
right,
it doesn't stick. But if you spend even 10 minutes a day on your
mm,
speaking practice, but you do it consistently, it's going to have a much bigger impact on your
mm,
fluency.
mm,
And one of the things that I tell my students to do is, use either to record themselves or to make videos. Make videos is even better,
mm,
and to do it daily.
mm,
And I usually send them to go online and look for a list of conversation topics. It's really easy. You
sure,
just, like, conversation topics. You get,
mm,
like,
mm, mm,
tons of free lists.
mm,
And then you choose one topic, or you also have the topics that are
right,
usually
right,
asked in the test.
mm, mm,
Um, so you choose a topic, and you just press record or turn on the camera, and you
mm,
start speaking.
mm,
Now, this is like if you have time and you're being intentional about it, and don't pause or start the recording over and over and over again, because this is usually what people do. They try to get it perfect. And this is
Right,
also
right.
an opportunity to learn how to, again, bounce back from getting stuck, from not finding the words, and doing it as a form of practice. Because when you record yourself or turn on the video, it's the closest thing to being in public when you're alone, right?
Right.
There is something like the energy shifts a little bit. You're
Mm,
like, you
mm, mm.
feel like you have this external gaze, and
Right.
it's more stressful, and we want to simulate that because that's
Right, right,
closer to how it's going to be in the test.
right.
So one of the ways, if you're practicing a specific topic, I would recommend to make a video
Mm,
and or a recording if you really, if you really don't like yourself on video, but I would recommend try to get used to it.
mhm,
And then to watch the video and then
mm,
give yourself 3 points for improvement, right? Maybe your voice was not present enough. Maybe
mhm,
you made a grammar mistake. You kept making the same grammar mistake and you want to be more intentional about it. And maybe there was a part where it was just like not very clear and you can think of a
mm,
better way to say it and use a better word. And then
mm,
you want to record it again,
mm, mm,
and then you record it again, just thinking of those 3 things. Now, just by repeating it, you're already going to
mm,
be a bit more confident and more
mm.
fluent saying it and using it. So you're going to say that and make sure that you're implementing those 3 things that you're thinking about. That's intentional practice. And
Right.
if you don't feel satisfied with it, you do it again. It doesn't have to be on the same day. You can do it every other day.
Mhm.
So that's one thing of like small, you know, it's more of an in-depth work. But
Right.
in general, I would recommend to choose a topic every single day, also to practice thinking really quickly of the answer and answering it. So that
Mm,
could
mm,
also
mm,
be, but the thing is, if you want to be able to speak about something quickly, you need
mm.
to do a lot of it every single
Right,
day. So using
right.
like recording yourself would be great, but you can also just speak to yourself whenever you have time, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
walk around, pretend like you're on the phone and start
Right,
having a conversation that you need to have with someone, or
right.
speak out your thoughts, right? That
Mm,
really
mm,
helps with the translation. You just like whatever you see, whatever you think, whatever you were thinking, like you want to say it out loud. That's another
mm.
great exercise that can help you with translation and also, improving your speaking skills.
So producing it and then kind of watching it and reflecting on it, being very specific, 1, 2, or 3 things that you want to improve, doing it
Yes.
again, and just kind of focusing on doing that on a daily basis or almost daily basis. And one thing that comes up when I give this type of advice is often, I don't like my voice, or I don't like I
Yeah,
don't like how I
of
look on film, and
course.
and it happens pretty often, and I
Yeah.
don't really have any suggestion for that so much. It's kind of like nobody does.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you have any advice for people who are in that situation or anything
Well,
like that?
first to explain why it feels so weird to listen to our voice, because
Mm,
when we speak, we hear our voice differently than how it is when it's recorded. Because
right,
when we speak, we hear it resonating inside our face,
right,
in our mouth, so it
mm,
sounds differently than when we hear it through a machine.
right,
And then it's like, is this how I sound? In a way, yes, but not how you sound to yourself. This is why the gap.
right,
And it just like with everything,
mm,
you do it enough times until it's no longer an issue. But
right,
you gotta give yourself the opportunity, because it's such an incredible tool. It really is. It's,
mm, mm,
definitely with pronunciation,
yeah,
because you can't hear your mistakes if you don't record them because you're so concentrated on what you're producing.
mm,
But
mm,
it really is such a great tool, so that
mm,
that roadblock is something that you can get past and then gain all the the advantages that this exercise offers.
mm,
So I
mm,
think that this is definitely something that you need to just be persistent and to keep doing until you get comfortable with your voice. And also think of athletes, right? Like a soccer player that plays on the field.
mm,
They What they do on the field is really intuitive, right? And they just like, but then to be able to improve their performance, they have to watch it. They have to look at what they did
right,
and then be like, okay, here I have a tendency of running to the other side or moving. I need to be focused on changing it. So reviewing your performance
Mm.
and then taking notes and being intentional about integrating those notes is the secret of all breakthroughs, right?
Mm.
Like otherwise it's just going to be, everyone will improve still, but you can have massive improvement and a real transformation if you just pay attention and you get comfortable. Also, yeah, you don't like start loving how you sound. Why don't you love what you hear? If you don't
Mm.
love what you hear, then obviously you're not going to love what's happening when you speak. So there's like, again, the mindset, right? Like, how do you expect to love your English if you constantly judge
Right.
your voice and how you sound? And, ooh, I don't
Right.
like it. You know, why would you
Right.
think that
Right.
other people want to hear you if you don't want to hear yourself?
Right. Right.
So
Right.
just,
Right.
yeah.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, I'm like, get over yourself. Listen to yourself enough times. I
Right.
get
Right.
it, but it's like it passes. I see it, like it
Yeah.
does pass. Just give it enough time.
Right. Okay. That's good advice. Yeah. If you don't like it, why is anybody listening to? Yeah, that's good.
At least in your brain, like
Right.
subconsciously, that's what you're saying to yourself.
Yeah.
No one's
Yeah.
gonna like my voice, right?
Right. That's a good point. Yeah. I
Yeah,
think, I think we have a tendency to just kind of try to put blinders on the kind of things that we don't like about ourselves, and so
yeah,
we don't have to think about it. And then we find ourselves in a situation like maybe you have to take a test where you have no choice.
yeah,
You kind of have to confront this issue, and then that's when it's a little painful.
yeah.
Um, what one thing that comes up with students is motivation. And
Hmm.
so, I find that at least for studying for a test, it's not the most exciting thing in the world. It's, you kind of want to just get it over with, pretty quickly. And so I find that people have a kind of almost 1 to 3 month window, maybe pushing it about 6 months of like pretty keen motivation to
Mm,
do something about, their TOEFL score,
yeah.
let's say.
Hmm.
And then that motivation does fade eventually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't know if you found the similar experience with some of your students, and then, how do you help them with sustaining their motivation?
Great.
Yeah.
So that's a great question and definitely something that needs to be addressed
Yeah.
because on one hand you have to stay motivated about what you're doing, and the motivation is not about passing the test. It's a lot deeper. It's like
Right.
what is going to be the result of you passing the test, and you need to constantly have that, to visualize that
Mm-mm.
outcome in your mind, to remember what is really driving you. Is it just to
Right.
self-actualize yourself? Is it to get a better job? Is it to relocate? Is it to study? Right? Like, so you got to visualize the outcome to keep reminding you of why you do what you do.
Mm.
Now, motivation is not enough. And this is why we need to build or to form healthy learning habits. So when you don't feel motivated, the habits will kick in and get you to
Mm.
stick to the work.
Okay.
So one of the ways to build habits is, first of all, to recognize how habits are formed, and or not formed, like what is preventing you from forming a healthy habit, um, and also like and also, what would get you to stay consistent. I do believe that when you're learning, studying for a test, or when you want to improve your English, you have to make it a part of your life. So you do want to do it daily. And when it comes to doing it daily, what happens is that people get super motivated and they spend 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day, sometimes practicing or learning, studying, and then it's not sustainable. Like, it's not really possible for most people who have maybe a family, or they have a job, or they just want to do other things, to do it, and then they think this is like the only way to study, and then they don't do the work. So it's better to put an upper threshold to your work, at least at the beginning, to be like, okay, I'm going to study up until 1 hour or 2 hours every, like, it's very individual for each
Mm.
person, but you want to do it, but you want to create a habit streak that you show up to do something in English every single day.
Mm.
Um, and also to recognize what is distracting you from doing the work, to make sure that you have a safe environment. You don't
Mm.
have a lot of people around you talking to you. You don't have your phone on and all the notifications. You don't
Right.
go back and forth between other things, because it's not going to be effective, and it's going to move you away from doing the thing that you do. So
Mm.
I think that reminding yourself of your true why, right? But the outcome, the real outcome, not passing the test, that's not going to be
Mm.
sustainable. And building strong learning habits, I think together is what is going to get people to the finish line.
Great. Yeah. So focusing on the why, what you're doing, and not just, you don't want a score. You want to go to a school. You want to move abroad. You want a better job.
Right. And
And
even then, like you want to go to school, why? Right. That's
right,
not the
right,
end result. Like what's going to happen as a result of you attending that particular school? How is that going to affect you and the
right,
people around you?
right, right. Is it there's somebody who said like ask why 5 times or something like that to get to the heart of why you're doing something?
Right. Right.
Yeah,
Right. What was, yeah.
yeah. I know what you're. I thought about it when you said go another step further, and yeah,
Yeah.
that yeah. If you keep saying why, and you get even deeper, why are you going to school for your family, and then it could be even, you can get a real emotionally charged kind of answer that'll help sustain you. And so
Yeah.
I think that's great. And that
And have
makes
an image, like really visualize yourself doing the thing. Do it
mm,
like, being that person that
right.
is after, the tests and school and the job and all of that.
Right. I think I've heard you say in a previous interview that you kind of visualize the job that you want in the future, the business that you want to have, and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And so obviously for you as well, you think it's important to actually spend a minute or two actually thinking about the image, actually
Yeah.
thinking about what you want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it gives you a lot of clarity, and even if it feels impossible, you open the option of it happening in your life in your mind, and then you're
Mm,
more likely to take the right action and to do the work, right?
right.
Like if you don't even have that as a possibility, if you like constantly say to yourself, "No, it's not possible. It's not going to happen to me,"
Mm,
right?
mm,
Then you're less likely to take the right action. It's going to affect your emotions, and when you feel down or discouraged, you're
mm,
less likely to show up and practice for the test if you
right.
think I'm going to fail, right?
Right.
So I like to visualize, to be very clear about what I'm trying to get and to have
Mm,
a picture of it in my mind because, to me that's more powerful than journaling or
mm, mm,
from each person is different. But like, I think that is like, you always go back to it. There is a possibility. It charges you with, with positive emotions. And
mm.
from there, you move on to doing the things that are necessary for you to get there.
Nice. So I should do that more. Okay, so
We all should with
yeah,
everything. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. You get caught up in the daily grind, and then you just kind of you forget the bigger picture. And I think that's very very important to focus on.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to just a couple more quick questions. One thing is about do you have any kind of tools or apps or anything that you would recommend to people who want to practice speaking at home, who might not have, so of course they should have an audio recorder or a video camera to record, or just a phone to record
Yeah.
record themselves. Is there any other tools that you recommend for practicing speaking?
So for speaking, I would recommend finding communities online that are free where you
Mm,
can practice speaking with other people. So there is Free for Talk. You just go there and there are like a bunch of rooms, and then you can go, and there are sometimes topics that you can just go and speak with other people. Again, like practicing on your own is great, but when you are, one of the biggest inhibitors is how people see you, right? What
mm,
happens when you're exposed to other people. So you can get to a certain level on your own, but then when you're confronted with other people, then the judgment starts. What are they going to
right,
think
right.
about me? What are they going to say? How am I going to sound to them? So the
Hmm.
this experience is also important. And again, there are a lot of free online environments or platforms where you
Right,
can do that. There's
right.
also the influencer community, my community on Facebook, absolutely free. And there is the speaking club where
Uh,
people can join, and like there are like 4 or 5 a week that you can just join and join small rooms and have that conversation. So I
mm,
know that people are really busy, but if you want to try that, I think that could definitely help with, and when you go into that room or conversation or even practice on your own, again, be intentional and say to
mm,
yourself before, what should I be focusing on? So is it managing my breath? Is it
Right.
being clear, making sure that I'm, finishing the sentences, pronouncing all the sounds at the end of words?
Mm,
Is it using new words? Is it focusing on articles, making sure that I'm not skipping those articles?
mm,
So I think that, and then like have one thing that you want to pay attention to. So when you go
mm,
into a conversation, it's not just something that you do on the go, but it's like you're really trying to integrate new things because it's a safe environment. It's not the test.
mm, mm,
But the test is like the end result in a way in this
right.
particular journey. So try to give yourself the experience of doing things as similar as possible to the experience in the test.
Mm, mm, mm,
um so I think that's it. I think using notes or speech to text and
mm.
just recording yourself and seeing, you know
Right. What comes up? Yeah.
dictating
Yeah.
something, and then to see if it dictates what you're saying, and if not,
Mm,
then you need to see, okay, it didn't pick up on what I was saying. Why is that? Did I mispronounce it? Was I not clear about it? Go investigate it. Don't just move forward. Be very
right.
thorough in that sense. Again,
Hmm.
quality over quantity. So I think
Mm,
that's also a really good tool to practice on your own.
right. I often recommend voice typing on Google Docs for that.
Mm. Yeah.
And yeah, I think what you said, quality over quantity is perfect because speaking can feel uh, like it kind of comes and goes pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It's hard to kind of pin down. So recording yourself, being intentional when you're going to speak to people, I think these are, the things that really help you get that quality that you don't really need to spend too much time every day doing it, but as long as it's focused practice.
Yeah.
And I think that's perfect. And there was one other, so one thing that you mentioned, actually in the beginning was kind of how your work focuses not just on pronunciation, but also on people speaking in a way that integrates with who they feel like they are, and they feel comfortable, speaking a certain way. So some students aren't sure if they need to work on pronunciation. They're not sure if
Mm.
that's actually, an actual issue or not. Just from
Agree.
the test, they say that, from their standpoint, it's not accent, but intelligibility, as long as you're
Hmm.
understood, is the most important
Yeah.
thing. And so if a student's not sure if they should work on pronunciation or not, of course, everybody's different, but what would you say about working on pronunciation?
So I think there are a few key elements that you need to understand that are in a way critical for clarity. So
Mm,
for example, primary stress. So like if you misplace the primary stress, it's going to be
mm,
hard for people to understand what you're saying in the flow of a conversation
okay.
without context.
Mhm.
So I would see, so I'm going to name a few elements that the students need to pay attention to and see if this is something that they're doing, because if it is, then the answer is yes. Like you
Mhm.
definitely want to work on that.
Okay.
Sheepship,
Mhm.
important, not critical, right? This
Mhm.
is like, I would say that's medium priority. It's good to be able to differentiate between sheep and ship. But
Right.
if, you know, you're going to say, I picked up my kids instead of my kids, everyone will understand you. It's okay. It's just
Mhm.
like that's an accent.
Mm-mm.
Um, but if you say she's a great engineer instead of engineer, then that would be, it could also it could become problematic because people would not think that you're saying the word engineer.
I see.
So
Okay.
primary stress is key.
Mhm.
um Dropping consonants or
Mhm.
adding consonants is also key. So if in your language, that happens a lot with Spanish speakers, Mandarin speakers, Chinese, Cantonese speakers, like some
Mhm.
Asian languages where a sequence of consonants is not allowed, right?
Mhm.
Then I would like, and then sometimes the way to resolve that in English, because in English you have a lot of words with a bunch of consonants at the end. If that's not
Mhm.
allowed, a lot of people resolve it by dropping
Mhm.
consonants,
Mhm.
mine instead of mind, or
Mhm.
tech instead of text. And
Okay.
then that can result in like, then people might not understand you. So if you tend
Right.
to do that or add vowels, um,
Mhm.
then I would say try to work on that. Because that could be significant
Right. Right.
in how people understand you. It doesn't matter if you choose the right word. If they don't get it, they won't be able to to understand the flow of conversation. And the last thing that is critical, I think, is replacing sounds, consonants in particular. So for example, if you tend to substitute the L's and the R's, right? Or if you tend to put an L at the end of an oo instead of an L at the end of words, then that could be challenging for your clarity. Again, one word would be interpreted as a different word. And I'm saying consonants and not vowels in particular because there's more freedom when it comes to substituting vowels, bed instead of bad.
Right.
That is also, but again, like if you don't have a lot of time and you need to focus on what is really important, I would focus on those things. The second thing is to see if there's hierarchy in how you deliver the words, meaning some words are more important than others. And if you stress every single word the same, again, it's going to affect your intelligibility. So we need to understand that content words, nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, usually take more room, right? Take up more space in the sentence. They're longer, they're higher in pitch. They don't all sound the same, but they're more dominant versus content words, all the prepositions and the verb be and the auxiliary verbs and on and at, could, would, should, am, is, are, all of that is usually reduced. We don't want to stress them. So if you're able to find that balance, it's going to definitely help improve your clarity. So I think that this needs to be a part of the work that we do. And all the rest, fine tuning your R, pool, pull, sheep, chip, like that would be only if you want to fine tune it or to improve it afterwards for your own purposes.
Okay. So, so I'm going to leave out some things, but basically, that mixing up vowel sounds is not as critical as something like, for example, putting equal stress on content and function words like a and the and that kind of thing. And then also if you are adding some sounds to words that are not there, for example, a lot of Asian languages in Japan, for example, they don't really have single letters, but they're in groups of two. So like ta, te, ti. And so, any word, if it ends with a consonant, they'll add a vowel. So, or just drop a consonant. So hamburger is hamburger. And so if you have a tendency to do that, then it might be an issue as well. And with a couple other things that you mentioned too.
Dropping consonants, same thing with dropping consonants and replacing consonants, swapping consonants, one consonant with another, two consonants that exist in English.
Okay. So like the R sound is a common one. That's a difficult one.
Yeah. R's and L's, L's and W's, B and V for Spanish speakers. TH, not so much. TH, DT, like, if you say think instead of think, it would still be clear. People are used to recognizing that change.
Okay. All right, great. Well, Hadar, thank you so much. I think everybody learned a whole lot. And let us know where can students find out more about you and what you do and, find more helpful tips like these.
Yeah, sure. So I have my YouTube channel, Accents Way English with Hadar, and my podcast, the Influency Podcast. And on Instagram, I'm at hadar.accentsway.
That's great. Hadar, it's been an honor. I've learned so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.